Hey everyone, it's Riley from Echidna Sewing here. Today I'm going to show you how to do this super cute reversible bucket hat. Here's what you're going to need. First of all, you'll need your pattern. You can download the PDF from our website. You'll need a sewing machine. I'm using the Brother NV50S today. You'll need a thread in your color choice. Today I'm using Resant thread in a gray color. You'll need pins, clips. I'm using Echidna Sewing clips, a pencil or tailor's chalk, a seam ripper, sewing scissors or fabric scissors, and your choices of fabric. Now with your fabric, I like to use a denim or a stronger fabric as the second fabric, as it gives a little bit of a hold to the hat instead of making it really floppy. Then with your other fabric, you can use pretty much any other cotton or lightweight fabric. So I've just got a light gingham fabric here today. You can also make this hat out of velvet, faux fur, or mink fabric. If you do choose to use one of those fabrics, I'd recommend doing both sides in that fabric rather than using a denim. If you want to add embroidery to this hat, make sure you add it before you sew the two parts together. Step number 1, make sure you have your pattern pieces printed out. When you print them out, you want to make sure that they are set to actual size and not scaled in or scaled out. There's a 1-inch square down the bottom here that you can check with your ruler to make sure it's the correct size. So you just want to go and cut them out. Now you'll see with your pattern, you have 3 different lines around the outside. This basically just shows the different sizes that you can have for your head, and the size guides down the bottom there. Now that you've cut your pattern pieces out, you can go ahead and grab your first piece of fabric. We'll start with the top piece of the pattern. So you'll only need 1 layer of fabric for this one. Go ahead, pop your piece down. Then using your fabric scissors, go ahead and cut that piece out. Then just unpin that and place that piece of fabric to the side. Now for your brim and your crown pieces, they need to be cut on the fold. So we're going to take your fabric and fold it over so you have a double layer. Then just putting your piece down on the fold, pin it down. Go ahead and cut that one out. Now you need 2 pieces of each of your crown and the brim. Go ahead and trim off any excess fabric. So if it's done right, your crown pieces should look like this. 2 of them. Now for the brim, do the exact same thing. Fold over your fabric so you've got a double layer, and you'll cut 2 of these out. And then your 2 brim pieces should look like that. Now you have 5 pieces for the first part of your hat. Now you want to repeat cutting all of those out with your second fabric. So now you should have 10 pieces of fabric altogether, 5 for your inside and 5 for your outside. And now it's time to sew these together. All right, now that we're ready to start sewing, you can go ahead and set up your sewing machine. Today I'm using a zigzag foot and T&C's regular point needles. First, you're going to take your 2 crown pieces of your first fabric and you want to pin them together with right sides facing in. You want to pin across the short edge and not across any of the long edges. I'm using clips here, but you can use pins if you don't have clips. Now that both sides are pinned, you can go ahead and sew a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance down the side. I'm using a simple straight stitch with the standard stitch length. Make sure you reverse back on yourself so the stitching doesn't come undone. I like to trim the edges of the thread straight away so you don't have to worry about doing it later. Just repeat down the other side. Now you can go and do the same for your other two crown pieces. Okay, now that you've sewn both of your crown pieces together, you can go ahead and grab the top part and the corresponding crown piece, and you're going to pin these together. What I like to do is to fold the top piece in half. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my tailor's chalk or a pencil and mark the edges of this. Then you're going to match up those points to the seams you've just sewn. I normally like to pin one side together, then I'll flip it over, match up the second seam, and then I'll go ahead and pin the rest of it together. If you find that you've cut your top piece a little bit too big, all you can do is just fold it over slightly and sew sort of like a little dart in it. Again, you can see my top is just a little too big, so I'm just going to fold that under and pin it. All right. After you've pinned, it should look something like this. Now we're just going to sew 1.5 centimeters again, all the way around the edge. Once you finish that, you can go ahead and trim that seam down. I like to trim it down to about 1/2 centimeter. If you have an overlocker and you would prefer to overlock these edges, go ahead and do that. Otherwise, we're just going to use a zigzag stitch. Once you've trimmed that, you can go ahead and use a zigzag stitch along the edge. I'm using a zigzag stitch with a width of 3.5 millimeters. Go and repeat those 2 steps for your second piece of fabric. All right, after you're done with those, you should have 2 chef type looking hat pieces. Now you want to take your 2 brim pieces of either fabric is fine, and you'll sew them right sides together down the short side. Now, repeat those 2 steps for your other bit of fabric. All right, now you want to take one of your brim pieces and match it with the corresponding chef hat piece. And with right sides together, you want to match up the seam of your brim to the seam of your crown. Pin those together all the way around. Hey, that rhymes. Now just sew around the edge of that one. again, trim around the outside of the seam and zigzag stitch or overlock. Alright, now you want to repeat that for your other piece. If you wanted to add any embroidery to either side of your hat, now is the time to do it before we put them together. So flip one of your hats inside out, so seams towards the outside, and the other one should be like that with the seams towards the inside. Now you're going to put right sides together, matching up the side seams together. That should look pretty much like that. And now you're just going to go ahead and sew around the outside of the brim. And when you're coming back around to where you started, you want to leave a gap of about 2 to 3 inches so that you're able to turn your piece inside out. So you can see here I've left a gap of 2 to 3 inches, and that's where we'll turn our piece the right way out. Now go ahead and trim the outside, zigzag stitch or overlock it. Alright, after you've done that, you can go ahead and flip your hat the right way out. Alright, should look a little something like this. Now what you're going to do is take the opening where you flipped it the right way in, and you're just going to fold those raw seams in on themselves. Pin them shut. And then go ahead and pin the rest of your brim flat around the edge. Alright, once you've pinned your brim down, what you're going to do is take your straight stitch again and sew as close to the edge of the brim as possible, all the way around. So now we're going to sew the details into the bucket hat's brim. As you can see here, I've done several rows of straight stitch all the way around the circumference of the brim. We can do this by sewing 1.5 centimeters from the outside of our brim. Making sure you're keeping the brim flat at all times. Then for the next row, you'll sew 1.5 centimeters in from the stitch you just did. You'll repeat this 4 or 5 times until you get to the seam where the crown meets the brim. And there you go, that is your completed reversible bucket hat.